Okay, you are live.
Thanks. Welcome everybody to the Thursday, November 16th, Annapolis Planning Commission meeting. I'll call the meeting, I'm Alex Pline, the chair. I'll call the meeting to order. And the first order of business is the roll call. And our recorder, Kimberly, is not with us tonight, so I will do the roll call. So starting with Ms. Butler.
Here.
Ms. Pico.
Here.
Mr. Pline is here. Mr. Sparkianudis is not here. Mr. Waldman's not here. And Mr. Imes
Here.
is here. And Mr. Sale is not here. Okay, so we have 4 members, so we have a quorum. And we can proceed on to the next item of business, which is approval of the agenda. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda as distributed today?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
You have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, great, thanks. Next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from October 19th. Kimberly sent those around, and does anybody hopefully everybody's had a chance to review those. Does anybody have any questions or comments about those?
I had one quick question. I don't remember seeing a memo from the deputy city clerk to Mayor Buckley dated 9/6/23, and it was an exhibit that was entered. Is there any way after the fact I can get a copy? I'm not going to amend the minutes at all. I just wanted to see that memo.
Yeah, I missed that. That's a good point. I don't remember seeing that that memo. Honestly, I'm not sure what it pertains to.
Mm-hmm.
So we could. I don't know. Is Mr. Lashinsky on? Could he answer that question? If not, maybe we should table this until the next meeting.
I will send him a prop to be promoted.
I mean, I don't think it's going to change the vote or anything. I just wanted to see it at some point, and I don't have to, see it tonight. This is as long as somebody emails it to me. It actually could be someplace buried in Granicus.
Hi, good evening. Eric Lashinsky, Chief of Comprehensive Planning, as usual. What was the memo you were referring to? Is the one from October 12th?
From the 9, it's dated 9/16/23, and it's entered as an exhibit under the item
22/23.
the art establishment beer and wine license. It's memo from Deputy City Clerk to Mayor Buckley. Do you have a recollection of what that was? Share my screen real quickly.
No,
Yeah, and the date of the memo,
Yeah,
Eric, is September 6th. Yeah.
Huh. I circulated the staff report, which had a number of attachments. So that's the only thing I would have sent around. It may have been part of that. Let's see.
Because it's recorded as a separate document, so maybe it is a second document.
Right. There was an email that was sent that basically clarified one of the questions. Let me see if I can find that. It was a follow-up. So
was that based on the questions that we asked?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
So maybe it's an email response, not really a technical memo, and that's probably
right. I think that's what it was.
Yeah, it was the response to the questions that we asked that you had gotten feedback from city staff.
Yeah.
Okay, if
essentially,
that's fine.
how.
Yeah.
Okay.
Got it. Thank you.
All right, yeah, thanks for clearing that up.
No problem.
So does anybody want to make a motion to approve the minutes as written?
So moved.
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed or abstentions? Nope. Okay, great.
Eric, I do have one question at some point. We talked about this before, about the Classic Theater of Annapolis and the fact that they already do have a liquor license and what exactly that is. Is there any way to look that up or we can figure that out? Because from
That's a great
what I've been
question.
told is they're paying a very small amount of money to have a liquor license on an annual basis. A lot less than than what's being proposed in this thing. And I know we had dealt with it before as a planning commission. I just want to make sure that they don't increase their amount based on this,
Right.
that there's something that hasn't been overlooked.
I will ask Lisa
Exception.
Minker in our office, is our zoning enforcement officer. She's the person I believe who would have that record of their license, and exactly what that is supposed to allow. So
Yeah, I think it
will-
was like they pay $1,000 a year, and it was something that we had put in place, years ago through the planning commission. They asked for our opinion on it. It was called the Shakespeare Company back then.
Yeah, they're located on West Street by Admiral Drive, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can look into that.
Okay, great.
Great, thanks. Well, the minutes from October 19th, and that's when the other major thing we had there was the work session with HPC on City Dock. Anyway, so those will get at some point in the near future. Kimberly will publish those on the city website in the Agenda Center. So those will be available to the public. Okay, next order of business is old business, and that is revisions to the draft comprehensive plan. So Mr. Lashinsky sent around a supplemental document of major text revisions that they had planned on making, and hopefully everybody's had a chance to at least review those. And you're going to make a little presentation, Eric, and then we can get into any questions people might have.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have a formal presentation. My intention was simply to go through the document. I know it was a lot to review. I wanted just to highlight some of the major updates. And as a preface for the commission and for anybody who's watching at home, I just want to reiterate that our intention is to have an updated draft comprehensive plan that the Planning Commission can take an action on at your next meeting. And so this memo that we sent out, which has major text updates, is an effort to be transparent and clarify, a clear process for the updates we're making to the draft plan. They're all in response to comments we received during the 90-day public review period from a whole range of folks who chimed in on this comprehensive plan. And, we had close to 200 comments. We made all of those comments public on our website, AnnapolisAhead2040.com. And we went through those very closely to see which, comments we could address. And I'm pretty happy with the updates we're able to make. And I think that folks who have participated in the process and following along, or those who are just catching up or plugging in right now, I think should take a look at the document that I'm going to go through in a moment. And we've put it on the website as well. Casey Ortiz, my colleague, is here and has been doing a lot of heavy lifting on keeping our website up to date and keeping updates flowing for the process. So that should all be viewable by the public. And, and I think there were some really substantial changes. So I'm happy to go through those. Let me go ahead and share my screen.
Yeah, just before you start, I thought
Yeah.
it was pretty straightforward to sit down with a copy of the draft that we had and read this and follow the directions in the document that you sent us and do the substitutions, and I thought that was pretty easy to follow. So thanks for making that easy to review.
Thanks for saying that. Yeah, I mean, it's it's a lot. It's a big document, and the changes we were making are very, I would say, surgical in different sections. And so, if you recall, there was we were basing our major text updates on the outline that the Planning Commission approved on October 12th at your meeting then. And that really gave us the framework for what to update. So we used that same outline to add our updates in this Word document. And so no pictures here. Unfortunately,
If I can interrupt you
Yeah.
here just for just a
Yeah.
second. On process, do you want us to make comments or ask questions as we go through this, or do you want to just hold it and then I don't know. I mean,
I think asking comments along the way would probably be best. I think
I have some comments. So So anyway, the other commissioners, if you have notes of things you want to mention, please do so as we get there.
Yeah, good point. This is just in order of the table of contents in the draft comprehensive plan. We just have the major proposed change topics are in black type from the outline, and then the actual updated text or edited text, new text. Some of it is new, some of it is edited from what was already there. That's in red, and I'll just try to be clear. We had 4 new glossary additions that I think are pretty significant. There may be a few others that we'll add, but these are ones that came up either at a community meeting or from the Maryland Department of Planning that required some consistency. So historic preservation came up at a meeting with the Ward 1 Residents Association. It was a great point. It was a question about, what is historic? How do we determine historic preservation efforts in the city? And so I worked with our Chief of Historic Preservation in Department of Planning and Zoning, John Tower, on this, and come up with a definition that was appropriate to Annapolis. The others all are just being consistent with the state land use article, and they're somewhat technical, but important to be consistent.
Yeah, I think those definitions of low-income housing and workforce housing, it's nice to have them defined because those are terms that sort of get used fairly often, and not everybody has the same understanding. So I think that's good.
Right. Yep. Chapter 1, there are a few changes. So this is kind of a big thing. We had something in the comprehensive plan called plan principles. I'm just going to show you what that looks like, just as a reminder. These were basically principles that would guide all of the goals and recommended actions and performance measures of the plan. And it was a recommendation that perhaps, we are working on an executive summary as well. It's something that we're going to have as a companion to the full document. And the recommendation was, well, can we just have like maybe the 10 big ideas or signature things that really define this comprehensive plan in relation to the last comprehensive plan in 2009. I thought it was an excellent recommendation. When I looked at these plan principles, I think they're all consistent with what's in the plan, but there's 15 of them. Some of them are very jargony and overly technical. And so we thought, well, maybe we replace these plan principles with just like 10 priorities that are really things that distinguish this comprehensive plan from past comprehensive plans, and things that, when you think about this plan, these are the things to we hope will resonate. So housing access for all, neighborhood preservation, inclusive economic growth, sustainable development, and they're organized by the section of the plan: thriving city, functional city, and adaptive city, pedestrian, bicycle, and transit connectivity, equitable public water access, citywide cultural programming and preservation, climate-ready infrastructure, lower carbon footprint, prioritize environmental assets. I mean, some of these were mentioned, just with less emphasis in the last comprehensive plan. I think certainly we were talking about climate change in the last comprehensive plan and carbon reductions, but they really weren't. They didn't have the sort of urgency that they do today. So it's just an example, but some of these were generally just not even on the radar. The public water access, the sort of emphasis on doing preservation citywide. We were certainly focusing on bike, pedestrian, transit, but not in a kind of coordinated way. So housing was certainly an issue, but didn't have the urgency it has today. So we think that this will make more sense and help to keep these issues front of mind as they review the comp plan. We added a new section that is talking about what's the connection between this plan and the past comprehensive plan, specifically the most recently adopted in 2009. And so we did a new section here that talks about kind of the history of comprehensive planning in the city and frames comprehensive planning in a way that should help people understand that this is less of an update to the last plan than, frankly, it's a whole new plan that is very much reflective of the people who participated in this planning process and the priorities of the city today. People who live here, our stakeholders, elected officials, the issues that are relevant today. I think for that reason, it's very difficult just to kind of update the last plan. It really we have to sort of look at perhaps what we were trying to achieve in the last plan, we did carry over quite a few items, but recommendations that were in the last comprehensive plan, if they haven't been advanced since in the time since 2009, they probably aren't relevant anymore, or the circumstances that would allow them to be relevant have probably changed. There are probably a few exceptions to that. But I think the recommendations that we have in this plan are very much timely recommendations that are coordinated with the circumstances of today. So that, I think, was an important thing to acknowledge.
So one of the comments that I had on that one,
Yeah.
And by the way, just I had sent my comments just in writing to staff today, just so they had a chance to review the comments that I had. But one of the ones I had on this was that it's really more of the sort of in the wording and the gist of that item too. That it not only reflects the people in the city who participated, but I think it very much reflects the time and the context in which that it's being written. So it's not just asking everybody, okay, what do you want? It reflects sort of the current thoughts in city planning, tries to build on things that have worked and not worked, in other places in the past, sort of, the zeitgeist, if you will, things that have been learned. And so my comment was that I think that in addition to saying, well, this is what the participant said should be done, I think it really does take into account, what's happening in the planning world in general. I think that's important to make maybe a little explicit in the
That's a good point. There are certainly lessons learned, and there are zeitgeist is a good word. It's a good word to use here. I think it's kind of sometimes hard to pin down the how to define the moment we're living in, but there's certainly a variety of forces working on us right now in the city, and they're pretty unique to now. We've been working on some additional maps as well. Casey's been handling that component. And so we're not including those tonight. We have some additional text that's intended to kind of be a companion to those new maps. And so one of them, in the first chapter, we want to include a environmental context map, given that there's a lot of recommendations in this comprehensive plan that are environmentally focused. And it seemed odd that we did not have a map in the first chapter. And this would carry over into the executive summary as well. We have awards, kind of a political map that shows the wards. We have a map that shows how the city has grown over time through annexations. It seemed only appropriate to have an environmental context map. So this text goes along with that. Getting into demographic trends, we received a number of comments that because the 65 and older population is the fastest growing population group in the city, that the comprehensive plan should really do more to address the needs of that population, and just be more clear about the types of things that are being done for that population. And we felt that was a really strong recommendation. We also understood that in looking at our demographic data, that the Hispanic Latino population is also growing very fast in the city. Those are our two fastest growing population groups, and they're growing in the last 12 years since 2010. Each of these groups has grown 3 times faster than the next closest group. And for the 65 and over, the next closest age group, and then for Hispanic Latino, just the next closest racial group. So we wanted to look at both these groups. We really just kind of dug into the census data a bit closer for each group and pulled out some metrics that we felt would be helpful to kind of understand these populations in closer detail, and be able to point to the kinds of things that that they may need, just based on issues of employment, poverty levels, racial racial descriptors, just how prolific these groups are. And so we're going to have infographics that use this data to help tell the story and identify where in the comprehensive plan we have recommendations that would be most relevant to these groups. And so, Casey did a lot of outreach to Hispanic community residents, but it's a diverse population. It's not just one, it's not a monolithic group, but still a very difficult population group to engage in our planning work. So I think some of this tries to compensate for that group not being as involved. The 65 and over is probably the most involved in our planning process. But we think this type of work will help a lot. In Chapter 3, municipal growth, we just wanted to be a little more specific about what is going to guide the kind of growth that we want to be deliberate about. It's not just necessarily, we're not just necessarily waiting for the growth to happen, but we will be more deliberate. And we have staff in our department that do economic development. They recruit businesses. They help small businesses. I think understanding that we're going to be more inclusive and we're looking at growth that's going to be sustainable, driven by technological innovation and connectivity. We wanted to have a statement like this that could really spell that out. We did quite a bit. We added quite a bit of new text related to growth beyond Annapolis. Now, the city doesn't control that area. We don't have any regulatory authority over what happens outside of the city, but we coordinate a lot with Anne Arundel County and the state of Maryland, and the Navy, other entities, partners outside of the city. It made sense to acknowledge that and the types of things that we can be more involved with as a city, staff, elected officials, community members. I know that the county is doing their regional plans right now. Their Region 7 is Annapolis and an extended area beyond Annapolis. We have Annapolis residents are on the stakeholder committee for that planning process. So there are ways that the city and residents can participate in planning beyond the city limits. We just wanted to be more deliberate about that. Housing, more we can advocate as a city for housing reform outside the city limits. It will help the city address diverse population needs. The county is doing that right now with major legislation aimed at inclusionary zoning. Transportation, obviously, the roads don't begin and end at the city limits. We probably coordinate most on transportation issues right now with the county. City staff review all of the county's transportation planning efforts. The county submitted a major grant, $8 million grant application recently for Forest Drive improvements, and the city participated in that grant application extensively. Greenways are another way that we can coordinate with the county much better. You look at Weems Creek, the headwaters of Weems Creek are actually not even in the city. So there are a lot of coordination opportunities. City participated with the county's recent green infrastructure master plan. It was adopted last year by the county. We have Waterworks Park, a city property outside of the city limits that is part of the Broad Creek Greenway. And then just specifically geographic areas, the greater Parole area remains a very challenging place for the city to sort of coordinate with, but it's a very diverse area in all kinds of ways. It's changed dramatically over the last several decades. We want to acknowledge that and be more involved in how parole is shaped in years to come, and acknowledge that portion of it is in the city, is an important historic and cultural area to the city. So there's protection work that we can do on that. The Annapolis Mall area within Parole is a lot of potential benefit to the city as it evolves. It's a lot of underutilized space there that could transform into a place that's more walkable and sustainable. It could have a dramatic increase in green space and tree canopy as it evolves. We have city transit that already goes to that area. There's going to be a new transit hub that's already been funded at the mall site. And Waterworks Park is in that vicinity, could be a central park for that area as it evolves. And then finally, David Taylor Research Center across the Severn River from downtown has been a kind of long deferred project to transform a kind of aged semi-abandoned research facility into a dynamic mixed-use center that could be accessible by ferries and really kind of complement downtown Annapolis. So we want to be involved in that process as it moves forward. No idea on time frame, but this is a long range.
About parole is that, and I don't think you maybe implied it, but didn't state it explicitly, but that's an area that the county has specifically targeted for very intense development. And I think from what I've heard from, both about this comp plan and just development in the city in general is that, that's causing a lot of angst, especially amongst the folks in Ward 3, which abuts parole. And that, having better connectivity between parole and say downtown, especially if there are going to be a lot of people, because the county, in parole, because the county is really, they're really funneling a lot of development there. We don't necessarily want everybody who's going to live in one of those places on River Road to all try to drive into downtown at the same time. We need to acknowledge there needs to be ways for people to get there to downtown or into the city without without having to necessarily always be one person in a car. And so I think that's something that I don't know how you change the language to reflect that, but it has to be thought about anyway.
Well, one way is we should acknowledge the West East Express Trail, which I think is not mentioned here, but that's that'll be a major trail connection between Parole and downtown. And then we could talk about transit improvements as well. That's a good point. It's definitely a good point. This growth areas map is this is just relatively minor, but the state has a way they talk about growth that is really oriented towards sewer service. The intent from a smart growth perspective is to not develop in places that don't have the infrastructure to support the new development. And the state has essentially organized potential growth areas based on sewer service. So we updated, this was a comment that came from the Maryland Department of Planning. We updated the growth area map on it's on page 64 to basically reflect the growth area framework. And just as a reminder to folks what that looks like, it's very limited growth area identified. These are basically just either in holdings within the city limits that are not technically within the city of Annapolis boundary, or they are just immediately outside the city limits, and it makes sense to incorporate into the city as a way of making services more seamless. That really has nothing to do with potential development. It's more just from a servicing perspective to ensure better service and coordination. So when you have a property like this one off of Edgewood Road that is completely surrounded by the city of Annapolis, it only makes sense for something like that, where Annapolis Middle School won't be redeveloped into something else in our lifetimes, but it's completely surrounded by the city limits. And for some reason, whereas every other Anne Arundel County public school property in the city is part of the city of Annapolis, Annapolis Middle School is not part of the city of Annapolis. It's just an odd anomaly. So very little change to this map. It's really just about semantics and clarifying what is growth, growth tier 1, growth tier 2. There's no growth tier 3 or 4. Those are basically in rural areas for the most part. So
Eric, I have a quick question, Eric, before you jump ahead. I was just
Sure.
looking at Chesapeake Harbor when you were talking about Edgewood Road. And yeah, it makes all the sense in the world to make that a city property, but what incentive does that community have to join the city of Annapolis? You know, from their perspective, I would imagine they pay less taxes being in the county. They have no interest in joining the city and paying more taxes. So how do we, like, what's the sell there?
It really comes down to water service. That's the primary reason why property owners choose to become part of the city, and it is the property owner's decision. The city, this is a misconception that we encounter at a lot of our community meetings with residents. The city does not initiate annexation process. The property owner comes to the city and says, "We want our property to be annexed into the city," and then the city and county both have to agree to it, and there has to be an analysis of the cost to add the new infrastructure to connect to that property. That is paid for by the property owner, and the city has to basically do an analysis of what the cost to the city will be and the benefit to the city. So it's not an easy thing. Annexation process can take years. But this property on Edgewood Road, yeah, the benefit would be being on the city water service, so they wouldn't have, maybe depending on well water today, and perhaps they're on septic sewer, they would be connected to the city sewer system as well if they're not already. I'm not sure about the
Yeah.
exact circumstances, but
Now, Eric, are there
Yeah.
places on Edgewood Road that are part of the county but also have city water and sewage already? that aren't
there might
annexed?
be. Yeah,
I
I
thought
mean,
there were.
Chesapeake Harbor might be in that category.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Then there'd be no
that-
incentive because they don't.
Right, right. And you know, I think Chesapeake Harbor, I mean, that as I understand it, was a hot topic when it was developed, whether it would be part of the city or not. And I don't foresee that changing at this point, but yeah, there were a lot of differing perspectives on that, I guess, at the time. But
What is that one spot that's totally surrounded? Is that a condo development or something?
the one on Edgewood Road, it's actually it's a group of single family detached homes called Cars Manor. It's I don't know the history about why it is not included in the city, but it's it's essentially a couple blocks of single family homes. And it's not consolidated ownership. There's a number of different property owners. I think there's one property owner that owns maybe a number of lots, but not all of the lots. And so, yeah, it's kind of just an odd situation. Well, kind of getting back to the memo, we added a bunch of new text related. This was a comment I think came from the commission about how can we be more specific about the inclusive economic opportunities that we're talking about in our municipal growth chapter. And so I went to our economic development staff and we discussed, there's a lot of things that are already happening, and there's some other programs that we would like to get going. But a lot of it hinges on, there's two basic studies that we need to do to be more deliberate about how we target economic development programs to be more inclusive and direct them to population groups that are underrepresented. We need to do a disparity study, and we need to do a procurement study. So disparity would focus on equitable policies and how minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses have been historically treated in the city, whether they're have the same opportunities. In fact, City Council authorized funding in the last budget for African American business grants. The law office has ruled that before we can offer those grants, we have to do a disparity study, sort of prove, we might know anecdotally that that group has not had the same opportunities, but we have to have this disparity study to sort of fully document what that looks like. And so that is something that I know our economic development staff are moving forward on. And then the procurement study is really specifically looking at the city's policy. You know, who have our tax funded projects gone to in terms of the types of businesses that get city work, and what kinds of services and products does the city buy, and are the groups that are underrepresented positioned to be competitive to get that business. And so, you know, it might be that those groups are not they're in maybe niche industries, and there needs to be some program work to kind of help expand the types of businesses that our underrepresented groups are involved with. So that we try to get into much greater specificity on this topic. And, you know, we highlight 4 of the programs that are currently happening that could all be expanded in the future. They're all really impactful programs today, but could even be more impactful.
So
Land use, yeah.
you know, one of the things that I had written about this is that, you know, I think those are all very valid things to consider, but there's also another piece to consider here that's not really discussed, and that's, you know, typically underrepresented businesses are going to be smaller and local, and the thing that's not really addressed here is reducing barriers to entry.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of, you know, I think of it as requirements in city regulation,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, sort of more of a bottoms up kind of approach, and that's not something I see here addressed. This mostly it sort of reads to me as, you know, what I would see in a government procurement document,
Mm-hmm.
versus like how can we make it easier for, you know, for local small businesses to enter and stay in the market without, you know, requiring them to have huge amounts of capital available to get past, you know, heavy regulation or process.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you know, I don't know why that's not addressed that way. Maybe the city doesn't want to reduce barriers. You know, they like the regulations, so they're going to keep it. But that's just, if that's something, I mean, I see that as a big piece to enabling small businesses. Maybe the city's economic development folks don't see it that way, and that's not why it's there, but it just appears to me to be kind of a hole.
No, that's a good observation. I think I could only speculate why it's not on their minds. I think that the disparity study and perhaps the procurement study might actually reveal some of those barriers. But that's something we can definitely add to this text. And it could be that our economic development staff, the tools that they're more, you know, have worked with more often are just the ones that they're sort of in control of, you know, the funding programs, the technical resources they provide, and they're not as involved in the legislation, you know, to kind of change regulations. But it's a very good observation, and I'm sure that there are some barriers there that we should address. So we can definitely put a mention of that here. So in land use, this is a big one, and this was just probably one of the most common questions, misconceptions, confusions that happened as we were on our roadshow this summer, talking with community members. Just people generally confuse the future land use map with the zoning map. We wanted to be more clear about what the difference is between those two things. And so we came up with a statement that tries to better clarify the difference. And, you know, I think it's understandable that there would be confusion here. And partly because we don't have a new zoning map in the document. We talk about the future land use map as something that influences zoning changes in the future, but then we don't have a new zoning map to sort of show what that might look like. So it's, we don't know exactly what the new zoning would look like. All we can do is point people to the recommendations that are in this land use chapter and a few other chapters that kind of look at where we can kind of make some of these changes in the future. But a big clarification that we wanted to make, when you look at this future land use map and you see, we have one category for residential, a question we got at least one community meeting was, well, does that mean the intention is to sort of consolidate all of our residential zoning districts? And there's something like 7 or 8 different residential zoning districts today into one residential zoning district in the future. And that is not the case. The future land use map really just talks about the best use of land in broad strokes. So it doesn't break down these land use categories into the finer zones that the zoning map will do. And so we wanted to really clarify that. The future land use map is much broader and more general in talking about the best use of the city's land. And then the zoning map should marry the recommendations of the comprehensive plan and the future land use map and implementation strategies to produce a zoning map that we hope is more straightforward in the future, that is something that does not require a planning degree to understand. And that's really the most, I would say, consistent thing that you might see in how our zoning map changes in the future. It's just trying to be much more simple and straightforward about how it's organized.
I think that second paragraph is one of the best pieces of clarifying text in the document, because I think that states very explicitly that this document doesn't change anything. It's
right.
Just as we've always said, it's a strategic framework that then the city can decide to make whatever changes they decide to make in the zoning map. But this document, I think it's really good you made it really explicit that this document doesn't change any of the existing zoning, because that seemed like it was confusing for people.
Yeah, and that future zoning work that we would do is going to be pretty granular. It's going to focus on specific parts of the city. It will likely not be a citywide rezoning, which would be way too complicated. It's going to focus on places where we know we have some community interest already, and it's going to involve a lot of community participation to do right. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. And I lost my train of thought there, but yeah, it was a big question that we had to answer in a lot of our community meetings. And the mixed use category that you see on that future land use map, all of that, the red areas on this, many of these areas are already zoned as mixed use, meaning there could be a variety of different uses on those properties that all have to be compatible with their surrounding context. Does not give them a license to do something that would be out of character or incongruous with their surroundings. It just means that this is a location where you could have a combination of different uses that are compatible with each other. And they're predominantly on our major corridors. That's a pattern that you would see and where mixed use might be appropriate. And we got lots of questions about mixed use at our community meetings. There was typically people were imagining mixed use development as only a high rise, high density development like the Annapolis Town Center. And we had to really correct that perception that it couldn't be farther from the truth, really. I mean, when you look at mixed use in the city today, you can find it in almost every corner of the city. It's very diverse and generally very small footprint developments. You kind of think of a corner store or restaurant with apartments above. And that's a very common example of mixed use in the city. So we're going to include some images of what mixed use looks like today in Annapolis and show the kind of diversity of that. And we also wanted to provide this description of that just to go along with it. But no, it's a
Yeah, I think you
it's
should.
kind of-
I don't know if you've already picked out pictures, but
Mhm.
highlighting some examples everywhere in the city in all wards
Yeah.
would be beneficial.
Yeah, we do have images. I mean, and they are in almost every ward. We actually used them at a couple of our community meetings over the summer where we knew this was going to be a question. And they're images that have been in presentations that we've probably given to you in the past already. But yeah, they're in almost every ward. So these two recommendations in the land use chapter are housing related. And so they're related to what we did in the housing chapter. I'll talk about in a moment, but there were two recommendations under this this goal focused on housing in the land use chapter. And we kind of reworked them, and we did the same with the related recommendations in the housing chapter. And the intent here was to be much more broad and less specific, because the reality is there's more analysis that we have to do to kind of understand where it will make sense to expand housing options and how to do that in a way that people can feel comfortable with, who are already living in the city and may not be as understanding of the housing needs of others. Or we heard this comment quite a bit in our community meetings, and we wanted to be responsive to it. And so, this first recommendation here, it's really about looking at the kind of incremental changes we can do to our residential zones to allow for more diversity of housing types that would be compatible with those neighborhoods. And we would be using stronger architectural standards if needed to ensure compatibility, meaning guidelines that would ensure that new housing types are consistent with the pattern of development that's already there. And then the next two are specifically about opportunities for workforce households. And that was something we defined in the glossary, if you recall. We updated that to be consistent with the state's definition. These are, just to oversimplify, people who work in our schools, police, fire, people who work in local businesses that today are generally priced out of living in the city. Very few options, increasingly few options of living in the city. They may be driving from farther away to work in the city, adding more cars to our roadways. It creates congestion. It's not good for their livelihoods, family life. So basically, prioritizing this group is the idea here, both for home ownership and for rental opportunities. And what I realized, Alex, do you want to talk about the comment that you had on this? Because I think it was a good one.
Yeah, and so, I like that those the 3.2 and 3.3 were explicitly written, to deal with that group of incomes. But the way that reads to me, especially if you compare it to what the prior goals were, it reads, and especially coupled with what you mentioned in the chapter on
The housing.
housing, yeah, that this reads sort of like, well, we should do more developments like the Willows. So that's which, I mean, and I have no problem with that. But that's sort of more of a model of let's build stuff that's essentially subsidized somehow. Versus what can we allow that makes the cost of building things lower. And by that, I don't mean make them cheaper, but say make them smaller. So, for example, if you're trying to buy a new house around the city, typically it's going to have 5 bedrooms and 4 bathrooms and be 2,500 square feet, because that's sort of what our code kind of drives at economically. That's what works economically. And I think something like allowing, I think the typology is garden cottages or something, but basically, a bunch of smaller, say 900 to 1,000 square foot single family homes. So there's still single family detached homes, but they're smaller, maybe two bedrooms and a bathroom. Very, very similar to what you see in older housing stock in the city. I mean, we have a lot of those bungalows in West Annapolis that are, they're slowly disappearing and being rebuilt, but building things like that are much more affordable just by virtue of the fact that they're smaller and not 5 bedrooms and 4 bathrooms, that might come in at something that somebody at 80% or 100% of AMI could afford, maybe in the $250,000 range or something like that. And I think the way the goals were, those 3.2 and 3.3 were written before, sort of get more at that. And those are sort of more market rate kind of solutions, versus the way these are written comes off to me as more of a top down, let's get some low income tax credits kind of thing. So while I think you should leave 3.2 and 3.3 because they're important, I don't know how you bring back maybe some of the text that was what they replaced, or somehow offer language that could make things like building smaller houses at a lower price point possible. And one of the things that in one of the goals that was removed was a really specific thing, was allow for smaller lot sizes. And that's a huge piece, because if you're going to, land is the most expensive thing in the city here. So if you're going to build a smaller house that's at a cheaper point, you're not going to put it on a 1/4 acre lot, because what'll happen is somebody will buy it and they'll tear it down and they'll put something big on it. They'll put 5 bedrooms and 4 bathrooms on it, versus small lot sizes that would have a bungalow on it, and that's the only thing that could actually be there. And that sort of keeps it inexpensive, because somebody looking for a 5 bedroom, 4 bath house isn't going to buy it, tear it down, and put something on there, because the lot's so much bigger. And I think the only way that works is if we reduce, say, lot size. And all that was kind of taken out in the way this was rewritten. So I think they're both approaches are important as different tools in the toolbox.
Yeah, we can tweak these a bit more to kind of, the intent was definitely not to only talk about top down, incentive type approaches, but we definitely want to encourage what you may have referred to it this way, market affordable housing, essentially housing at different price points, that would be affordable to a whole range of people that in that moderate income bracket. We have a very few different types of housing being built in the city today. It's, as you say, it's all very kind of monolithic, large 4-bedroom homes on large lots. That's frankly what
That's the only thing the economics drives you to.
right economics and our zoning to a large degree, encourages that kind of development. And
Right.
we go to great lengths in the comprehensive plan to talk about how just kind of common sense duplexes and just modest apartment homes are sort of outlawed in the city today.
Right. And I
Certainly some of
realize
those.
you could use,
yeah.
You could use something like our plan unit development code
Yeah.
to do something that's more intense than the zoning allows. But, that's a whole process in and of itself that,
Yeah.
You got to have deep pockets to navigate that. And so
Yeah.
typically where it's going to get used is to build, 400 apartments and not, a little community of 12, 8 or 900 square foot homes, which
Incremental type of development.
something
Yeah.
that sort of fits in, fits in reasonably well with existing neighborhoods.
Yeah.
But it does allow for slightly more intense use, but while still
Mhm.
keeping it something like single family housing and not,
Yeah.
Not a 5/1 apartment building, which I think
Yeah.
most people don't want in a single family neighborhood.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, there's some great examples that have been built in recent years that I think, the one that I use most often, and I didn't expect to do this, but I want to just point out one example of what we're talking about.
You're gonna
That
show the
I
one in
end up
Fayetteville,
referencing.
Arkansas, or
No, actually Indianapolis, believe it or not. And these aren't necessarily in the price point that we're talking about, but in Eastport, right on Bay Ridge Avenue, it's the development called Sailor's Quay. You can see these homes here that are all kind of on tighter lots. Let's see if I can. It's kind of slow here, but anybody who kind of drives this corridor has probably recognized these homes. Let's see. They're just basically on tighter lots, and the number of homes that the project was able to accommodate is a lot different than some of the other home developments that are happening right now.
was that
They're
a
very
plan unit? I
consistent.
forget, was that a plan unit development?
It was, yeah.
Well, think,
And it was commercial. There was commercial there, and the developer promised to keep the commercial, and they never did. And it was like some of the last commercial development that we, or commercial space that was zone commercial in Eastport. So it was unfortunate because at some point the developer promised they would have some commercial space in the first level of, I can't remember how many of the houses, but the city just didn't enforce the zoning code, and the developer got away with doing that, which,
Yep.
In hindsight, it looks fine now, but we lost the commercially zoned, would have been a really nice mixed use development there. So it's
this stuff
sad.
is all, the stuff on the opposite side of the street is all still, frankly, it's all still commercial. It's essentially mixed use. But
that
just,
development is not, but it would have been great if it could have been, Eric. It would have been fantastic. Yeah. It's right across from the cut and curl and all that. Yeah.
but to finish
Yeah,
your thought,
and that was also the
those are-
development that had the MPDU units that didn't look like they belonged there at all. They looked like the servants' quarters in the back, and they had a
They
real.
made them so small that no one wanted them. It was just,
Well, they were just stacked on top of each other. They weren't integrated like over at Uptown Murray Hill, and people didn't want to buy them, and they were trying to get out of making them MPDUs.
Well, so my thought on something, what I had talked about earlier is the fact that, those places at Sailor's Quay are probably all 2,500 square feet. They're pretty large.
Yeah.
Dwellings,
huge.
But, if you were to cut those all in half and make separate single family houses that are half as big, they're not
Yeah.
going to command $1 million. And, that.
Yeah.
And, and.
Yeah, and
and they're going to be
But the
cheaper
land is
as
so
a result.
expensive. Yeah. The problem is, even on my street, these tiny, tiny little postage stamp lots, people are buying them for $712,000 and
Yeah.
building enormous houses with no setbacks, and they're just building on every square inch. So I don't know. I think the land is just too expensive to do what you're talking about. It would be great
The
though.
kind of stacked, that Sailor's Quay development could have been stacked apartments, two duplexes. I mean, it could have been something else. And I think the people who develop in the city, they do make a determination on what's more straightforward route based on our zoning, and that may have been the more straightforward route, but
And the example that I've used in the past is that property that's for sale on Bay Ridge now, the old church property that's an acre.
Yeah.
Technically it's R2, so you could put 8 units on it, but it's probably going to end up get redeveloped with 4 $4.5 million houses on it, because that's what works economically. But if you could put 12 or 14 900 square foot single family houses, the economics would be the same. You'd just end up with more smaller units.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but our zoning is not going to allow something like that. So, developers are not, they build what they can make money on, because that's how that world works. And we have to allow them to be able to make some money to build other things other than $1 million houses. And typically that means you got to let them build more of them with, with some sort of shared yards and, that kind of stuff.
Right.
But still,
there's a lot of money.
ownership. They could be ownership
sh-
units and, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I should have probably shared an example from somewhere else rather than the Sailor's Quay, but because there are a lot of great models of things happening in other places that are totally appropriate for Annapolis, and there's just we're seeing so few of them here. We're just seeing a very one-dimensional approach right now to housing here.
Right, and that's sort of to circle it back after that long discussion. That I think that was really my comment is what's the way that was changed. It's very one-dimensional, as you put it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Sure. Well, and so one of the tools that we're looking at to really help to innovate how we do zoning in the city is the term that's often used is form-based zoning. It's basically a way of using architectural standards that are more objective and tailored to get the kind of outcomes that we want to see. And one of the comments that we received from the Planning Commission past meeting, I think it was from Mr. Walvin, maybe others chimed in, was we really need to see an example of what this might look like for Annapolis. And we did some searching for a place that has done a zoning update like this that might be comparable now. We found one in Kingston, New York, which is about 2 hours north of New York City in the Hudson Valley region. It's right on the Hudson, historic city. It was actually the state capital of New York at one time, believe it or not. It's a little smaller than Annapolis, about 25,000 people, but same geographic size, got maritime zones. It has natural resource amenities, historic districts. So it has a lot of really comparable features to Annapolis. And when we looked at the zoning code that they created, which was a comprehensive citywide zoning update, it has a lot of things that I think give us, provide a good precedent for what we might want to do here. One of the first things to acknowledge is they've really simplified the number of zoning districts that they have. And I just want to point out a couple of things. So when I go, so this is their, oops. This is their zoning book that they created. Just want to highlight a couple things in here to give you a sense of what this looks like. This is their zoning map. It's remarkably, it's actually across 2 pages. It's remarkably straightforward, simple. You can see the zoning districts are kind of based on context: Main Street, neighborhood, large lot, conservation, natural zones. City today does not have a zoning district that's for parks or natural areas. They have a special district designation, I think picks up their maritime areas. And so when you compare that to the city's zoning map, which I think is this. I mean, we have 31 different districts. It's hard to really identify pattern and theme to how the city is zoned. You can see these changes that have been made over time that just kind of carve out small areas, and it's very complicated and very very unwieldy. So that's one thing about Kingston's zoning update that makes a lot of sense. And when you look at the zones, oops, again, sorry. You can see the kind of character that they're using. So they have an urban center group of zones that includes a main street. That could be our own main street, a flex, which seems like it has some flexibility for different types of buildings, and the neighborhood type category for the downtown. Then they have neighborhood zones, and these images just look like they're straight out of Annapolis. Large lot would capture a fair amount of Annapolis, conservation, natural. They have a waterfront zone. Actually, I didn't see that on the map, but and then just to give you a little bit more context, 2 more things I want to show you. The kind of information that they provide for these zones, it's just very straightforward. I think nobody really looks forward to looking at the city's code book. It's very text heavy. There's no images, or very few images. It's not really designed for user friendliness. This zoning code has drawings like this that, while it might still be technical, it shows somebody, when we talk about setback areas, what are we talking about? What are the distances that we're talking about? A different chapter of this zoning code goes into the kinds of things that are appropriate in those setback areas. And, like they have images like this that show, section view of a building, and, height and the frontage area of the building. And it's just, I think, remarkably clear. One more image I want to show. They also go into building types, that are appropriate. So, this is the detached house, and they talk about, there might be one dwelling unit that's allowed in this detached house, but then they also have a duplex house type, which might look exactly like a detached house, but allow for 2 dwelling units. And they basically provide parameters for these building types, and they're all really well illustrated, so you get a sense of what the intent is. Of course, the architecture could be tweaked in a few ways, but you get a sense of what the intent for that particular lot is. And they have this for all the different building types that are allowed. You know, neighborhood business is something that nobody's really creating in Annapolis State because it's just challenging to do within our zoning. But if this building type was more clear as something that we want, then maybe we'd see more of it. I just wanted to highlight, these are some images of things that we will probably be pulling to put into the comprehensive plan to give people a sense of what that kind of form-based zoning might look like.
And just one other comment that I didn't mention earlier, but we've talked about this in the past, is that it should perhaps be explicit that the architecture for form-based codes could be very, very neighborhood specific. So what the standards look like in Ward 3 might be different from Ward 2, you know, just to respect the existing character.
Yep.
Yeah, I know
Absolutely.
that's, you know, that's certainly gets at comments made by people like Alderwoman Pindell Charles, who you know, wants to make sure the character of the neighborhoods in Ward 3 are, you know, it's not sort of homogenized to be something that's not there now.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So then just last piece of this chapter, this is a specific clarifying text about the intent of the former public works facility on Spa Road. As you might recall, it's one of the sites that is included as a, we had recommendations for about a dozen large properties in the city that would be ideal as a redevelopment opportunity to better serve the city today. Most of these are aging shopping centers that have large underutilized parking areas. The city does not have many large properties that are vacant. So most of these properties are all previously developed in some way, and they're just not serving the city as well as they could be. So this former public works facility on Spa Road is one of those sites. It's the only site. Actually, I think we include Waterworks Park, a portion of Waterworks Park as well. But this is really in the city, and it's the largest city-owned property that is really suitable for redevelopment. You know, it has a history of industrial use and contamination. And question we got at a number of community meetings was, well, how could we be talking about future housing on a site like this when there's so much we don't know about what kind of contamination may have been there? And so we wanted to be crystal clear about the process that will guide anything that happens at this site. And we did that with this paragraph. And, you know, the fact is that we have a city council resolution from 2022 that supported the ultimate goal of having a mixed use redevelopment on this site that would include some housing that is affordable to low to moderate income households. But nothing's going to happen on this site until we have a thorough environmental investigation, which is happening right now by our Department of Public Works. And then pending the results of that, which will be third-party reviewed by the Maryland Department of the Environment and probably others, there will probably be a remediation action plan depending on what is identified. And then that remediation would have to happen, of course, before anything else happens on the site. And you sort of have to know what the ultimate goal for the property is to define that remediation and the testing that we're doing right now. So if we did not anticipate putting housing here, we're only going to be testing the soil to a very shallow depth. If the goal is to have housing here, the testing goes far deeper, I think to 15 feet. So we just wanted to clarify that, since there will continue, I'm sure, to be questions about what is the intent here. And I hope this does clarify things. I mean, I think the other thing to acknowledge, and we may add this here, is that, you know, there, believe it or not, there are brownfields that have been in existence throughout the city in places that most people would not believe today. In fact, very close to the site is a high-end townhouse community, the Enclave, which was also a brownfield site on Spa Road. You know, I was going through the state maintains a brownfield inventory list of all the properties that have been identified or have strong likelihood of contamination that's been documented. And you know, it's remarkable to see the properties in Annapolis that have been remediated over the years for new uses. It's just something that is very common. And the EPA provides significant amount of funding to help in these remediation processes. So that's just something we wanted to be clear about.
And Eric, I know I was at the last Choice Neighborhood Initiative meeting where they had a really nice depiction of what the housing might look like on Spa Road. So you're in this little paragraph, it talks as if there's no real thought about what might be on that spot, but that obviously people are anticipating some mixed income housing related to the redevelopment of Eastport Terrace Harbor House. So yeah, I'm trying to understand why that's not even mentioned here, because it does seem like we have an idea of what we want it to be used for.
That's a good point. We could definitely mention that here. I think that that is something we should probably acknowledge, because you're right. I mean, there's so much that does need to happen between now and then. But yes, I mean, that is the goal. That's partly why the city council did their resolution. And we could definitely acknowledge, that's a good point. We could definitely.
Yeah. And start doing the testing that goes 15 feet down. Don't just do, a simple phase.
No, that is what's happening. I mean,
okay.
That is the environmental investigation that's happening. It's called a phase 1 and a phase 2.
Right.
So that is actually what is happening. And I think what you're able to see, I think is mentioned here, that it's actually a relatively small portion of the overall site that would really be suitable for, just from a just basic development standard kind of approach. I mean, this is close to the Spa Creek headwaters. There's critical area here. It's not as if the entire property is going to be redeveloped, and there's a lot of area that will be reforested. There's some area that will be used for recreational amenity, to complement what's at the complex already, the Bates Athletic Complex. And so it's really the portions closest to Spa Road and on that kind of upland area. So that's also, and we may even include that image that you mentioned that you were talking about.
That would help, I think, because I think people that are really interested in Spa Creek headwaters would be happy to see that map that you're talking about.
Yeah. Okay. Good point. All right. Housing.
Sorry, I don't mean to make more work.
No, it's fine. That's not a huge lift, really. But these reworking of these housing recommendations, they're pretty consistent with what you saw from the land use chapter. Really we tried to be a bit more broad here to acknowledge that there's still more work that has to be done to kind of analyze changes that should be made. And at the end of the day, I mean, this recommendation H1.5 is really important. A lot of the zoning changes that would happen to improve our housing supply ultimately related to the zoning not complying with federal fair housing standards. And, we want to be clear that that's driving a lot of this. So that's important to acknowledge. And then the other two, H1.6 and H1. Those are 100% consistent with what you saw in the land use recommendation changes. There's
Not to belabor the point, but
yeah.
same comments apply
Yeah.
about this is sort of one dimensional.
Yeah. So we'll make the same change to these that we would make to land use and to acknowledging some of those comments you made. And then this H4 it's consistent with what you saw in. Actually, no, I'm sorry. It's a different recommendation, but it's really about tailoring the new housing that might be available to populations that we can document don't have the access or that have a certain need that's not being met today. And that is really specifically related to federal fair housing. This is the one. H4.1 is the recommendation that's consistent with what you saw in chapter 4. And then finally, just two more things. Home ownership. We want to acknowledge, there's a important difference in adding more homes that allow somebody to own a home versus rent a home. Home ownership builds equity, wealth. That leads to a whole range of other benefits that somebody could take advantage of, whether it's improved health, education, career outcomes. They can pass down that equity to future generations to break cycles of poverty. So there is a fundamental difference. If we can create more homes that are for sale versus for rent, we can create more housing stability and really open up doors for people, literally, to new opportunities. So we want to acknowledge that in this paragraph. And then this idea about environmental sustainability influencing housing. We got a number of comments. How can we better connect our green building standards that already exist in the city or that should be updated to the housing that's getting built? And the standards, they do have size thresholds. They don't apply to housing that's under a single family home has to be over 3,200 square feet, I think. Even with the size of housing that may be economically viable in the city, you still don't see many houses that size. So there's a sort of, it hasn't been updated in a while. So there's that. And then really just there are updates that we can look at to energy efficiency, water efficiency, site design. And what's interesting, it seems in our green building code is that there's requirements for what the permit application has to include in terms of the design, but it's not clear that those things are then accounted for when the inspections happen, So that's something we wanted to improve on. And then finally, there is probably a size of project that would make sense to do a post-occupancy study to understand how sustainable building practices actually influence the environment after, occupancy. And, in light of some of the issues that have happened with the Wilborn Estates development on Forest Drive, it just seems that we want to understand how these standards are really impacting the occupants and the quality of the housing. So that's just what this is about. If, when that Eastport C&I project moves forward, I would expect the standards for those homes to be as high as anything in the city. It's just, a high profile project that we can't really afford to get wrong. So transportation, this passage in the beginning would be kind of a intro to the chapter. It's also something I think Planning Commission was asking for, that there is a fundamental relationship between transportation policy, land use policy, housing policy. I think at the city council level, you've seen that in some of the debates about parking reform, where, it's been mentioned that can't really create a more pedestrian oriented city if you're really just privileging one type of transportation, that being, personal vehicles. There's definitely interconnectedness between our policies in these three areas that we wanted to be clear about. I hope this paragraph does that. This is an important recommendation that the Maryland Department of Planning recognized we were missing. Although we talk about in the narrative the importance of Annapolis being involved in the Bay Bridge crossing study that's happening and the future expansion of the Bay Bridge, we talk about what the city should advocate for. We don't actually have a recommended action on that, so we added that here, and it's very much related to providing other transportation options as part of the bridge expansion. I think there's a lot of support for these types of multimodal investments. And then the State Department, the Maryland Department of Planning also asked us to include some text about how the state is approaching connected automated vehicle technology. Driverless cars is a common way we talk about this. So we included some kind of boilerplate information about how the state is approaching this. We kind of acknowledge that Annapolis is certainly not going to be one of the first places to welcome this technology, and there's a lot of due diligence that still needs to happen for this to even be considered. But we wanted to be aware of it and just basically have it be in this transportation chapter, so we're not getting caught off guard as it evolves.
Yeah, and as a skeptic of this kind of technology, I really don't like I think that the assertion that they could reduce traffic congestion and lower the need for parking and all that stuff is a really unproven assertion. I just don't like that sentence because I just don't think there's any validity to it necessarily. And we could, but who knows? In that, I think the only part of that sentence that's really valuable is that it could provide new mobility options.
Yeah.
But those other things, I would hope you could take those out just because.
Yeah.
I just don't think they're valid.
No, I mean, you're right that there's certainly the debate is thriving on this technology. It's certainly not finalized, and there are a lot of questions. I happened to see these types of vehicles in action in San Francisco in August when I was there, and there was a lot of chaos, frankly.
Yeah, I think they'll solve some
yeah.
problems, but not the problems people think they'll solve.
Yeah, we can definitely dial back that sentence, and I don't think it has a whole lot of consequence, frankly.
No, I know it's kind of a nit, but it's one of those things that just raises the hair on the back of my neck. That's all. Yeah,
no, I understand. It's definitely more of a wait and see kind of approach here. So that's the main thing to communicate. This is not going to be happening tomorrow. Community facilities chapter. We had some very pointed comments that came from the Annapolis Education Commission and perhaps from the Planning Commission that really were about. We have a map on. It's actually it's in the Trent, I believe. No, it's in the community facilities chapter. Let me go to this just to show people what we're talking about here. It was a map that's intended to show that when you look at schools in the city, and prioritizing investments around our schools, transportation network is where we could really have an impact. Annapolis, as you all know, does not control our public schools. It's a county agency, Anne Arundel County Public Schools. But what we can control is how safe it is to get to these schools, and that really could have an impact on not just safety for students and families, but people who driving close to these schools and deal with congestion, and the more kids that can go to school without having to be dropped off, just to ensure safety, or is going to add impact to our roadway, positive impact to our roadways. So the comment was, well, this map showed a 1/4 mile kind of walk radius to our schools, but the comment was really like, that's not really significant enough and the reality is that kids are coming from farther away than a 1/4 mile, and particularly our middle schools and the high school. And we could be far more, and we don't even show the high school on this map, but so we could be far more deliberate about that. And so, but we don't have the updated map here. Casey's been working on it, and we can say that it's going to look at a much broader radius, but also include transit as a way that could really facilitate access to particularly Annapolis High School, take some pressure off of the school bus system. And we kind of acknowledge the radius that's more appropriate to look at. So that's kind of the big.
Yeah, I thought this language needed to be strengthened, because it's just sort of out of bed with the requirements that ACPS puts on students to get to school, without buses, or it's just, in many places it's just not safe. And I think a middle school student walking on a sidewalk that's 8 inches from somebody going 50 miles an hour on Forest Drive, it technically meets the requirements to be walkable to school, but it's just not safe. So I think we really need to emphasize that we do need much better improvement. So like the language here, it's just, I know it's a nit, but the language is just kind of weak. Like, should be improved. I mean, I would say that most people don't want their kids walking to school because it's just not safe, especially getting to Annapolis High, and that really disadvantages people who can't drive there. They have to walk down Beaver Road, or walk from other places, or ride a bike, under 665.
Yeah,
it's horrible. Yeah. I'm surprised somebody hasn't been killed.
No, you're right. That's a good that's a good pickup. We can definitely strengthen the language in this section. The infrastructure does have a long way to go in a lot of places. This is another real inadequacy. I would say that there's a big oversight to not have this in the first draft of the comprehensive plan, but just the importance of maintenance of our parks and our trails, and just given the reality that we have over 20 major capital projects in the city's budget today for a variety of new parks. Many are water access improvements, and we have a lot of trails that are going to add miles of new trail network. We really are not equipped today to manage these new facilities. The park system that we may have by the time we do our next comprehensive plan might be unrecognizable from what we have today. And so we need to be much more forward thinking about the maintenance requirements that are going to be needed and how we're going to pay for those. And there's a whole lot of things that we could be doing, but certainly our Rec and Parks Department may need to be thinking about bringing on new staff, such as a trails team or a natural resource manager. There's probably ways of promoting current staff with professional development skills that could allow them to do some of the specialized work that we currently outsource, like tree pruning or maintenance of stormwater features, green infrastructure type of work. So
Or through, sort of non-traditional partnerships. I
Yeah.
think Waterworks is a great example of that. I mean, virtually all of the Waterworks trails were built with volunteer labor that's revolves around the Mid-Atlantic Off-Road group more. And
That's a great
basically the
point.
mountain bike guys have built all that and they actually maintain it.
Yeah.
They have this sort of army of volunteers that go out and, blow the leaves off the trails to make them safer to ride. And they let people know when it's safe to use the trails, when it's not muddy. And I mean, they really run all of that for free. And it's kind of it's sort of a non-traditional partnership that you might mention here. I don't know what the right language is, but non-traditional
and likewise,
partnerships are,
and I would add to that, likewise, there's also Save Our Trees Annapolis, which is doing
Yeah.
a lot of the invasive species removal from the trees in our current parks and, conservation easements. And I think it's important, Eric, I agree with all these additional projects coming online. We definitely have to include some maintenance language and some money allocated to those projects. And especially if we're putting stormwater BMPs in the ground, we have to maintain them in order to get our MS4 permits. But I would say even on our existing trees in various parks and conservation easements, we need to do something now, not just when we're not maintaining them very well with just volunteers. But it's helping, and it's the kind of non-traditional partnership that is working. We're going to have to bolster that in some way. In the future.
That's a great point. We had a very productive discussion with council members at the Environmental Matters Committee meeting, their last meeting, and about tree canopy goals. And I haven't gotten to the environmental sustainability chapter, but that is an area where we are bringing up the goal on tree canopy, but it needs to be met with increased resources. And it became really clear how poorly funded that part of our budget is. And that's partly why we haven't made any movement on that in years, our tree canopy expansion, preservation. And so, that's a great point. We definitely, and I would expect in the next fiscal budget for the city, there will be a significant change in our tree canopy program.
That's good news.
Yeah.
And there's also a lot of grant money coming down the pike. So I think we should try to get our hands on that as much as possible.
Yeah, that's a great point. So in this chapter, we also talk about things that aren't parks. We talk about schools, we talk about public safety. And this was something that we needed to add, this updated text about the adequate public facilities related to police protection, which was updated this year by the city council. Not debating it at this point. It's really just something that is in the city code, but needs to be acknowledged in the comprehensive plan so that it's clear that this is something that was recently changed. And it's essentially creates more flexibility for how that part of the adequate public facilities standard is met, given that the city is having a very hard time hiring additional police officers, even though it seems that we're trying harder than ever. It gives the police some greater latitude for to provide recommendations for other types of things that could address safety. So that's it's just kind of a fact that we need to acknowledge in here. But in the development regulations chapter that I'll get to soon, we do acknowledge that, there's other things that we can do in our adequate public facilities that haven't been addressed yet. So arts and culture, the big thing is, and we're changing the name of this to Arts, Culture, and Historic Preservation. This was a big appeal. It came from a variety of comments. So it made sense. There's a lot in this chapter that's about preservation, but it wasn't intuitive. People were going into the comprehensive plan trying to find preservation discussion, and did not occur to them that it was in the arts and culture chapter. So this was just kind of a straightforward change. And then we had some comments that may have come from Planning Commission and others about, we talk about diversity in regard to preservation. We want to look beyond the Annapolis Historic District, which is just primarily focused on downtown. We want to be citywide in that preservation focus, but we don't really talk about diversity in regard to arts participation and kind of cultural programs. So we added a new section on that really just tries to acknowledge that, the city government is not really we're not the entity that's providing the arts and culture programming. Really, it's all this variety of different institutions in the city that are kind of uncoordinated in a lot of respects, but doing their own programming, and they have their own missions that they're trying to address. We want to acknowledge the kinds of things that those organizations could do to address diverse participation, but also that the city can be leading in certain respects, just in the fact that we do give out grants, we organize events, and a lot of that is done by the Art and Public Places Commission. So they could be leading the way in how their grant program works, and being very deliberate in who those grants go to and meeting certain diversity goals. We acknowledge that Maryland Hall, which is a very central institution to our arts community, recently completed their first diversity, equity, inclusion statement, and that's probably a good standard for other institutions to look at. So this is just more to kind of frame that as a important need. And just also related to Maryland Hall, we had a recommendation that needed some clarity here. We got comments about it because it seemed to leave open the idea that all of the areas around Maryland Hall could be redeveloped. There was a recommendation about a campus master plan that would look at the areas around Maryland Hall and Bates Middle School for how they could be better utilized. But really the intent here is for outdoor activities and cultural programming. It's not to say that we want to add new buildings to those areas. It's more that there's a lot of events that happen there, a lot of different uses that aren't really coordinated. And we could be much more deliberate about how that area is utilized and shared. So that was just clarified. Chapter 9, environmental sustainability. The big change I mentioned earlier is we had a goal of reaching 45% of the city's land area being covered with tree canopy by 2024. We upped that to 50%. That was the goal in the last comprehensive plan. We really had not made any progress towards that in the last 13, 14 years. And really just felt like it wasn't realistic. It is ambitious. 45% is identified as kind of the minimum threshold for really having an impact on water quality. That's where the 50% goal in the last comp plan had come from a study that was done in the early 2000s from Montgomery County that really identified 45% of land area having tree canopy being kind of the minimum threshold to have an impact on water quality. And so the idea was, well, let's go above and beyond that. We went to, we set 50% as the goal. So long story short, we're back at 50%. I think city council members understand that we're not really going to meet that unless we have a significant impact on our budget. And there's a few very specific recommendations that are already in this draft comprehensive plan that would help us meet that goal. And my understanding is they're already working on those ordinances now, just to try to get a head start. We also added a statement about environmental justice, which is kind of implied in a lot of parts of this comprehensive plan, but we really weren't. This is another oversight. Like park maintenance. We just really weren't speaking directly to this topic. And we talk about social vulnerability and that there are communities in the city that have been historically neglected, underinvested. With environmental justice, it's really about some of that inequity being specifically environmentally focused to the point where communities of color have been adversely impacted by environmental devastation and pollution. Now, Annapolis may not have some of the big industrial pollution sites that larger cities have, that neighborhoods have to live next to. But when you look at water access is a hot topic in this comprehensive plan. You look at the communities that have access to the water and those that don't, it's very easy to see that communities of color have been cut off from the water and not really seeing the same kind of investment in the waterfront in their communities. And so that is one specific area that we wanted to highlight in talking about environmental justice within this comprehensive plan. And it's right next to a section where we talk about Hawkins Cove, which is really an important site for addressing environmental justice. It's connected to our revitalization of our largest public housing community in Eastport, the Eastport CNI project. So that was an important addition. We also added some more comments about a recently completed study called the Military Installation Resilience Review. This is actually asked by Maryland Department of Planning to address. They wanted us to be much more thorough in how we included this. It is a major project, a major plan that was completed with the Navy, the county, the state. It looks at all of our critical infrastructure and how to protect that infrastructure, our assets from climate change vulnerabilities, and it looks at these categories. These are the assets that it looks at. So it has very specific guidelines for all of these items, and we want to make sure that this was covered in the comprehensive plan. In some ways, we're kind of referring folks to look at that plan. It's in our appendix. It's another very lengthy, thorough plan, but we did add one new recommendation related to this, which is that as we evolve our planning around coastal flooding, that we include the Naval Academy's Sea Level Rise Advisory Council. This is pretty specific. It's just that this is the group that's tasked with updating sea level rise projections as they impact the Navy's interest in Annapolis. So we need to be coordinating. Our Office of Environmental Management needs to be coordinating with this group. And then this is kind of tied into recommendation that was in the housing chapter, which is to just be much more clear about our green building standards and how they should be updated. and what the relevance is. We have the same updated recommendation that we shared for the housing chapter. Is also, we had already been talking about green building standards as a way of addressing carbon, the carbon footprint of the city. So we just expand that section and improve the recommendation. And then the last sort of major element chapter, water resources. These were two requests from the Maryland Department of Planning to have much more clear acknowledgement that we have the adequate capacity to meet the population growth that we're anticipating for drinking water and for sewer service. Turns out we do have that analysis. It was done for a Anne Arundel County 2022 water and sewer master plan. And so we pulled that information from that plan, coordinated with public works staff to get this information. And so we're just including that. It actually goes up to 2050 in that Anne Arundel County plan. That's fairly straightforward. Now, this is really the last major, last chapter has a major change, any major changes. Development regulations is a key part of our implementation section of the comprehensive plan. Really speaks to the kinds of things that we should be addressing in the city's development code regulations to guide the outcomes we want to see that can implement the goals of this comprehensive plan. And so we already had quite a bit of information in this chapter, but there were some missing elements. We're going to include the same information that I mentioned earlier about form-based zoning, the Kingston, New York example. So that would be addressed here as well. But we added quite a bit of information about adequate public facilities, which is one mechanism to ensure that any new development that happens is helping the city to meet, make sure that we are equipped to handle that new development. So we kind of explain how the adequate public facility requirements work, what they apply to. We explain the areas in which they can be tailored to meet the goals of the comprehensive plan better. It really comes down to the standards that developments have to meet to ensure adequacy. And it's also if a certain category of public facility is deemed to be not at the demands of this new development, what are the rules that allow that development to improve the adequacy so that they can get their certificate of adequate public facilities? And those are the two areas where we can tweak the requirements to get different outcomes. And so we highlight recreation as one example where, today you can pay a fee if it's deemed that our current parks do not have adequate sort of services or facilities to meet the new population that's coming in with a housing development. That development can pay a fee that would go towards improving the park spaces. But is that fee enough? Is it in keeping with the costs of doing park upgrades today? It might not be. It could be tweaked to get better results. How we calculate that fee matters. The other thing is how are we assessing recreation? It could be a value placed on access to nature and water versus a ball field. Should there be better access to those things? That's another area that we could be much more specific about if we want to. And that would carry out the kind of vision that's in this comprehensive plan. So we sort of acknowledge that there are things in the adequate public facilities requirements, categories that would be much more sensible or relevant to be impacted by this comprehensive plan, not all the categories will be impacted. The schools, for example, we don't control the schools, but we also recently updated the schools requirements, I think in 2019. So it's unlikely that's going to get updated again anytime soon, but these other categories are all, I would say, fair game to be impacted by the goals of this plan. And then waterfront development is another category that was really missed. We wanted to be much more clear about how we can better influence the city's waterfront. Now, it's important to acknowledge that a lot of our waterfront is in the areas zoned for maritime uses today, and those did just receive a major zoning update in 2021, the first time those zones were updated in 34 years since they were first created. But there's a lot of waterfront that's not in the maritime zones, and there's a lot of things that happen on the city's waterfront that could be guided to achieve different goals. And so we basically identify 4 areas where we have kind of priority from this plan. It's equitable public water access, it's climate change adaptation, it's watershed restoration, and it's the maritime industry. And we basically identify areas in our regulations where we can influence these priorities to get better results. And then lastly, Chapter 12, relatively minor thing. We wanted to highlight the fact that Annapolis is in a heritage area. It's a state approved heritage area. It's really an opportunity for the city to take advantage of grant funding and other incentives to guide our preservation programs and access to parks and open space and trails. And so it's a benefit that we want to be more deliberate about. We're going to have a map that shows the heritage area. And then lastly, our recommended action matrix. This is really just the summary of all the goals and recommended actions that are in this plan. They're organized by chapter topic. So municipal growth, land use, housing, etc. We had comments about what is the funding mechanism for these recommendations. It's a fair question. Truth is that majority of the recommended actions really require no additional major fundraising. They involve staff time and commitment from staff and elected officials and our partners, whether they're at Anne Arundel County government agencies, community partners, institutions we work with. But then there are projects that will require additional funding. And so we tried to clarify where those funds typically come from and the mechanisms to guide those funding decisions. And then we also got a comment about monitoring our progress on this comp plan. It's a fair comment, and we wanted to be clear that there should be a format for how we monitor implementing this plan. I think my division within our Department of Planning and Zoning is really, I think, has to take the responsibility to create that system. It might involve some kind of hybrid of annual reporting and a website where we kind of track our progress. Not every recommended action is something that is going to happen tomorrow, but I think there's a lot that can happen in the short term, and I think it'll help us to prioritize those actions. So that's something that we're going to take on. It'll provide greater transparency and accountability, I think. So that's it. Happy to answer any other questions or discuss anything else, but
Eric, quite a bit of this content seems to be addition
Mhm.
the comprehensive plan. And I know there was discussion about the length and complexity of the existing drafts. Is it safe to say that a majority of this is new content versus revision?
I don't have a real accounting of that, but I think there is quite a bit of new content.
Okay.
And I should have said at the beginning that we are creating a more concise action plan that's going to be, frankly, that'll be the reference document that most people use. It's going to have an executive summary and that summary of goals and actions. So that's probably going to be 75 page. That's probably going to be a much easier document to navigate. And the full document will be more of a background. I think we're not going to just have only existing conditions in the full document, but I think it's going to be more of a reference. So yeah, we are adding to the full document, but I think some of the new content is going to feed right into the executive summary, and that's going to be really helpful. I think I'm still working on the executive summary, but I think that's probably going to be in the 20-page range, something like that. It's going to combine some of what we have in our chapter 1 with some of what's in the implementation, development regulations chapter, and then some new content.
And are we going to get that before we vote at our next meeting?
Yes.
So we'll
I'm
have
aiming,
the 20-page, executive summary, and then the concise action plan of 75 pages.
I'm estimating, but yeah, I think our recommended action matrix, that chapter 13, that's I think it's around 50 pages or so. So that plus the executive summary, I'm thinking the action plan will be
Okay.
around 75 pages. So
Okay.
yeah.
If we can get it a day before our meeting, that helps too. I know
For
you're
sure.
busy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
thank
that's
you.
definitely our intention. Yeah.
Thanks.
Well, I think just in general, these have been great additions. In a lot of the clarifications were really good. That very responsive to all the plethora of feedback that you got. So I'm happy to see that. And while I appreciate that does make the document even a little bit longer, I think a lot of the comments about the length there was a little bit of cognitive dissonance there, in that somebody says, "Oh, I can't read this, it's too much," but you didn't add this part that I wanted you to add. So, so be it.
Right.
But I think that with the addition of the executive summary and action plan, that should make the burden of getting the gist of it a little quicker.
Yeah.
So anyway, I didn't intend that we would have a vote or anything, but I don't know if we have procedurally the equivalent of a resolution versus an ordinance, in the sense of, I mean, personally, I think you're on the right track, and I endorse all of the stuff that you've done. I don't know what the other folks say, but I think you're going in the right direction.
I think
And
I think this is great. It's aspirational, but it's also realistic as well in a lot of ways to have a plan put forward. Couple things I'm a little bit, I really liked when you were talking about the historic preservation artistic part, where you talked about culture, getting culture in there, because a lot of people don't understand what diversity, equity, and inclusion really is. It's not just representation. There are, you did mention the Maryland Hall, but I have to say, both of the theaters in town, Colonial Players and Annapolis Summer Garden Theater, have had diversity, equity, and inclusion statements for a long time. And actually, the Annapolis Summer Garden Theater was has been the leader with regards to like the Pride Parade and other things as well, that aren't just about race or gender. And I think you need to just keep in mind that there's a lot of different. There's a lot to be said about it. I'm not the expert on diversity, equity, inclusion, but I know a lot more than it's not just representation. And there are a lot of reasons It's not just about how many people you can get involved from the different cultures. Also, I don't want you to waste your time too much on bringing up Chesapeake Harbor, because that is on public sewer and water. I did look that up. So just so you're aware of that.
Yeah. Thanks.
And the only comment, I think this is really going in the right direction. The thing that gave me a little bit of heartburn was just what you said towards the end, that the funding mechanism for the items, the action items that are recommended, really, the mechanism will be largely what we have in our current system. So our staff can manage some of the changes that we're recommending, and there won't be a big call. I think what you said is that there wouldn't be a huge call for additional dollars, but I think a lot of what we're trying to do is going to entail a lot more money, especially when it comes to some of the environmental goals and preserving or conservation easements, trying to hold on to some of the green space. I mean, we have to buy those spaces if they're publicly owned right now or privately owned right now. So I envision that we would have to have a lot more money to do some of the things we're talking about that are so aspirational. And I think you said at the beginning that a lot of the things from 2009 that didn't happen because of the lack of resources. So maybe you can walk me through that, and maybe I misunderstood what you said.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So what I was trying to say is that there are a lot of recommended actions in here that are really about kind of doing things differently at the staff level, prioritizing different things that can help us meet the goals that don't necessarily require new staff, and frankly, there is a lot put on staff in this comprehensive plan, not just planning and zoning staff, but it's public works and transportation and rec and parks. And there will probably need to be some new staff positions, like we talked about the maintenance issue. But what I should do is, in that funding statement, is kind of account for how many projects are really require that additional funding. And so we do have a mechanism for doing that accounting. If I can just show you really quick, in the recommended action matrix, I think it starts around, let's see here. We have it's kind of a simplistic way of doing it, but it's, we don't do hard cost estimates for all the recommendations. We really just have kind of a dollar sign type of thing. And it's a relative cost, we kind of explain here, $1 sign cost is minimal, $2 signs cost is a factor, and whether something will get implemented, but it's not prohibitive. And then $3 signs it's a significant cost. We're going to have to find a way to pay for it somehow. And could be a challenge in some cases. So what I should do is really do a counting of how many projects have like the $3 signs, how many have the single dollar signs. But, this is just a good example page that a lot of these things are just kind of policy orientation. We're going to approach something with a certain perspective, and it's not necessarily going to change the way we allocate resources per se, but it's going to impact decision making in some way. So those are minimal cost, so that, but I think that by looking at how many of the recommended actions are really in that kind of will need significant new funding, we can kind of be more accountable there. Because there probably are some, and there's probably a lot that are already in our capital budget that are accounted for. There's certainly, the longer this planning process has taken, the more things we've started to kind of already address, and there's a big for example, there's a big uptick in how much money we're putting towards public water access in the current capital budget that wasn't there when we first started drafting these recommendations, a couple of years ago. So,
Mhm.
anyhow,
No, that would be
we'll
a great,
provide some more.
yeah, thanks, because I think that would help, especially on some of the things you talked about earlier, like maintenance or stormwater BMPs and things like that.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, well, if nobody else has any further comments or questions, thanks, Eric, for that walking us through there and allowing us to sort of provide some real-time feedback. I think that was valuable for everybody.
Yeah. Thank you for the feedback. I appreciate it.
Okay, so last order of business, new business, and that's the Maryland Department of Planning annual report. Are you going to walk, or you or Casey going to walk through that quickly, or? And fortunately,
Yeah.
we have a quorum here, so we could we can vote on that after
That would be good.
discussing.
Yeah, I can walk through it. Casey's here in case questions come up. He did a lot of the data gathering, but I could probably walk through it relatively quickly. Let me share my screen again. Realized I don't think I was sharing my screen when I was talking about the recommended action matrix, although I thought I was. All right. So this, as a reminder, we haven't approved one of these in over a year. This is an annual kind of standard report that is required by the Maryland Department of Planning. It really just accounts for impacts to the city from development and how we're addressing those. So it's very formulaic. You can see this different sections that are defined that we kind of have to answer to. And there's a short version and a long version. And the short version you can fill out. It's like 2 pages if you had under a certain threshold of permits filed. And I can't remember the threshold. Casey, maybe you can. I don't know if you remember, but
It's
we're in the
50.
law. 50. Okay. So we're in the long form category because we had 66 new residential permits in 2022. PFA refers to the priority funding area, which is a large portion of the city, but it's something that the state manages in terms of it's for grant purposes primarily. But I should acknowledge that this form was sent out to the Planning Commission earlier this week. So you're not seeing it for the first time, but just kind of walking through it. Section 2, we account for all of the ordinances that were adopted in 2022. Some may have started in 2021, but were ultimately adopted in 2022. These are all ordinances that have impacts on development of some kind or another. So you should recognize some of these.
Yeah, these were all things that we provided recommendations on.
Right. So we account for those. You could see here the question following that: was there any growth-related changes, including land use changes, annexations, new schools, changes in water? No, none of that happened in 2022. Did your jurisdiction identify any recommendations for improving the planning and development process? Well, we did start accepting digital submissions. We have a new online interface for doing that. It's called EnerGov. Frankly, we're still working through kinks on that, but it has the capacity to be a much more effective system. And we're working to migrate from eTrackit to EnerGov right now. A lot of that has already happened, but there's still aspects that we are working on. In the next section, is related to development capacity analysis, which refers to how much capacity we have for new development. So we have to do this every 3 years. And we're going to do that after this comprehensive plan is adopted, so that we make a mention of that. But based on the last one that was done, we're able to say that we have a certain amount of residentially zoned acres in our priority funding area with capacity, number of parcels, and the number of units. And then this is really kind of the most important part, I would say, towards the end. We account for the number of constructed units in the city in 2022. This line, total number of units constructed, is really the main line that the state is interested in. The next two lines are relevant, but the units reconstructed or replaced is actually included in the total units constructed. So 78 units is actually from the Wilborn Estates project, which was the reconstructed Newtown 20 public housing community. It's now managed by a private entity. It's still housing that's affordable to people under a certain income threshold, 60% of the area median income. But it's functioning in some ways the way it was before, for all intents and purposes, just being managed by a different entity. But those units were all reconstructed. And then there were about another 20 units built in other parts of the city. Really not much to show for major or minor subdivisions in 2022, although some are under construction. They were approved earlier. And then when you look at commercial development, commercial growth, this was a bit challenging to come to, but you can see the numbers here. Square feet, total site plan area in acres, and then square feet, and then constructed. I'm trying to think of projects that would have been in this category.
One of the projects was the Hillman Garage.
Right. So
That's the bulk of most of the building square feet within this.
Right. Because I was going to say there has not been a lot of new commercial development in the city, but that's so that's kind of a little bit outlier. But
yeah, there were only like 6 or 7, I believe.
Yeah. The rest were probably much smaller. So this is really just going through our data that we keep on permits, and final permits. And so this is the last section. It's pretty consequential. It's talking about adequate public facility, the status of whether the adequate public facility requirements is leading to any restrictions in development, and that's what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to, be a check on whether we have the capacity to service new development. And so we do acknowledge that in 2022, there were restrictions due to police and schools. We are specific in the schools that had restrictions. The populations served by Eastport Elementary, Hillsmere Elementary, and Tyler Heights were all restricted at some point during 2022 because of those schools being over capacity. They have since been rectified. We talk about that below, but with police, it's low staffing numbers. Our code says we have to have 3.2 officers per 1,000 residents. We're not meeting that. City Council addressed it through the adequate public facilities amendment that I mentioned earlier. But we still need to get to that number. That's still a goal for Annapolis Police. And then with schools, we had high enrollment, over capacity enrollments at those 3 schools. With the schools, with Hillsmere and Tyler Heights, those had major capital projects that expanded their capacity. Those projects are completed. With Eastport, there really was a kind of precipitous drop in enrollment at almost every school in the Annapolis area. And I think, COVID impacts probably the main reason. It's hard to necessarily know for sure, but that led to most of these schools being, below their capacity in 2023 or later in 2022. So we kind of acknowledge the code change to police, this 0923, and then the capital projects I mentioned.
So I had asked about Annapolis High, because that's sort of depending on who you talk to, it's basically at 100% capacity now, maybe even higher. But it hasn't triggered the threshold to stop any development.
That's right.
It's as you know, it's a matter of a lot of discussion. I don't know if it's this sort of a black and white question they're asking here. And I was curious, if there should be some mention of the issue of Annapolis High. And I'm not very sanguine about the redistricting effort in the next in 2025 fixing that, because if you follow the redistricting, that's a whole can of worms that I don't know that that's going to solve the problem.
Yeah, I think it's something we should add here. I should say, we interpreted this form pretty conservatively, because technically Annapolis High was not restricted, but that is due to the fact that our code allows us to deduct the number of students that go to Annapolis High School from outside of the Annapolis feeder zone. There's a number of students who commute for different special programs. So it is over capacity technically. So we have this kind of workaround in our code. So I think it's a good pickup. I think we can mention it here. I think that meets the intent of this form, which is to kind of keep tabs on issues, evolving issues that we need to be aware of, and the state needs to be aware of. And
frankly, it helps put some pressure on AACPS on the county, because as we all know, this is not something the city has any control over, nor can they really do anything to mitigate it. So it's putting the county on notice that they're about ready to cause a big problem is even if it's a small thing, it's worth doing.
And as you mentioned, the redistricting plan that the county will be doing for the Annapolis area, it's supposed to start in 2025, is not going to be a very quick process, and it's not going to be very popular, and it's going to be very challenging to change the dynamics of who goes to Annapolis High School and how to offset the numbers there, primarily because we have rivers that divide the city from neighboring areas, and those are historically been kind of significant boundaries. So
isn't this going to be particularly significant, Eric, when it comes to even the Choice Neighborhood Initiative? Adding additional families there will really impact the high school.
So that's a great point, because on the one hand, it will impact Annapolis High School in terms of on the ground, how many students are going there. But from a code perspective, a lot of those households will be exempt from impacting the APF, because there are exemptions for certain income levels and projects that utilize the low income tax credits. Any units that are 1-bedroom or studio apartments are exempted from the accounting. So it's going to definitely have an impact on Annapolis High School in terms of the actual, school experience. So that you're right. I mean, that's something it's another aspect here. But we'll account for it. And, we're trying to, we do coordinate with Anne Arundel County Public School planning staff, and we're really trying to keep them focused on this issue. They focus on the whole county, but Annapolis High School is definitely a major concern. So we will add it. So that's the last few questions. Is
Yeah,
really
I thought we did have a transportation plan. I think I saw it.
Well, the county has done a few that impact Annapolis, but technically they weren't done by the city. They weren't led by the city. So yeah, we participated in the and I don't know if they were in 2022, but we participated in something called the Parole Mobility Study. I think that may have been 2021. And Anne Arundel County recently, I think it got adopted in 23, their walk and roll plan. That also included Annapolis, but
The only plan that we've done, I don't remember what year it was maybe 21 or 20, was the TDP, the Transit Development Plan. I think that's the
Maybe
only,
that's it.
that's the only
That's
one
a
that
good
we're
point.
required to do
That's
statutorily.
You're right. That might have been 21. I mean, that is definitely one we did, but we'll double check that. I think it's either 2020 or 2021.
Yeah, that's required by the is it FTP or whatever the federal
the Federal Transit
FTA
Yeah.
administration
Yeah.
or whatever that.
Yeah. Yep.
Because we get the money for the transit system.
Yeah. So anyway, that is the extent of this document.
Yeah, so I would make a motion to approve this report, with the additions about Annapolis High.
and CNI comments, right?
Well, it doesn't. I think. Yeah, actually, we could probably. That's going to be a huge project, and so I mean, I think we could mention that. It's sort of like, yeah. I mean, I think as a reason of concern, why we would be putting it there. It's sort of like
It
already.
could stop. Yeah. Wouldn't it be horrible to stop this entire thing we've been working on for how many years because we are over capacity at the high school? Somebody's got to be connecting those dots and figuring out what to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, we can add that. Sure.
Okay. Can I get a second?
And I second the motion.
And for discussion, just if you don't mind,
Yeah.
just a couple of things. It's so minor, but you got these revision dates at the bottom of every page and from about 20 months ago. And also on the front page, it said, which is a cover page, it says it's due by 2022, even though that's just a cover page. The last sentence in the first paragraph. So you may just want to change those.
Thank you. Those are good catches.
Okay. Well,
So
all
I
in
think we
favor
have a
with the-
second motion. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. So we have a second and those additional comments from David, sort of administrative clerical things, just to dot the I's and cross the T's. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any nays or abstentions? Okay, let the record show that we were unanimous in approving the report as noted.
Great.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Well, thanks, Eric, and Casey for sticking with us through those two items. And brings us, I don't have any other communications so brings us to adjournment for the evening. So I entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right.